Hello. Today is Tuesday, and it is December 27th, and welcome to the last Commissioner in a Car of 2022. I'm Dustin Zarni. I'm the Democratic Elections Commissioner for Onondaga County. And though I'm on vacation this week, I still thought it would be important to keep up with some of my content here because the hand count pushed a lot of stuff that was I wanted to get done before the end of the year to now the very end of the year, and before you know it, 2023 will be here. In fact, it'll be here on Sunday, and we'll be looking ahead to 2023. So I thought this week's episode of Commissioner in a Car would be a good time to kind of talk a little bit off the cuff about what went down in 2022 and what were some of the major developments. So this will be kind of more of a bird's eye view of 2022. I plan on, for this week's weekly wonk, to do a little bit of a month-by-month breakdown along with some of the stuff that I had on my website on dustinzarni.com. So on Sunday, that should be released, and hopefully you will read that. But I thought it would be important in a podcast form or videocast form to talk about what I felt were the most important, overarching major themes of 2022. And 2022, for elections anyways, starts and ends with redistricting. Redistricting really played a huge role in this year's elections at the state and somewhat now at the county and local levels towards the end of 22. But at the beginning of 22, it was all about the state redistricting and the New York State redistricting process. For the first time in New York State history, we had a independent, and I use quotes there, redistricting commission that was put into place in 2014 for the next cycle, and it was. And the reason I put it in quotes is because I never really refer to it as the New York State Independent Redistricting Commission because I didn't believe it was independent. I believed that these were political appointees made up of the major parties and didn't really rise to the level of an independent redistricting commission. And what we saw was that it was designed to fail. You had equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans on there, even though there's not equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans in the state. And this was supposedly a design to get the parties together and have them come up with consensus maps. And it did nothing of the sort. After a whole year in 2021 of digesting data and having supposed, redistricting sessions all throughout the state, the Independent Redistricting Commission, again, what they're calling it, not what I call it, but the redistricting, the New York State Redistricting Commission put forward a set of maps, but they were not a consensus maps. In fact, they put forward Democratic maps and Republican maps in January, and the legislature rejected those maps. And then the Independent Redistricting Commission then was ordered to get back together and produce another set of maps. And here's the crux. The Republicans on the commission decided not to attend it and not to even come up with partisan maps. They came up with no maps because they couldn't reach a majority to send maps to the legislature. So the legislature went ahead and drew their own lines. Well, in February, candidates started to walk petitions based on the lines that were drawn by the New York State legislature. But then a lawsuit was filed, and even though in April candidates had put in petitions for these lines, in late April, early May, somewhere in there, we finally had a decision on that lawsuit, which said that the process used by the New York State Legislature was partisan, and that the maps for the New York State Senate and New York Congress had to be redrawn. New York Assembly was left out of this because they weren't initially sued on those maps, although another lawsuit is happening on that, and I'll go into that in a second. So then the Senate maps and the congressional candidates were left in limbo. The judge ordered that, and it went all the way through to the highest court in New York, the New York Court of Appeals, that we would have a second primary in August with maps drawn by a special master. And we didn't even really have this finalized until the middle of May, when we were already preparing for the June primary for the governor's election. Then during June, these candidates walked petitions in new lines once the special master drew the lines, and those lines took so many different forms. I think people had whiplash, especially locally with the New York Senate district lines flipping back and forth. Rachel May's district went from going to Oneida into Cayuga. John Mannion's went from going to Oneida into Oswego. It just was a very chaotic, intense month in May to get to these final maps and then have petitions start in June. And all of that really impacted boards of elections quite a bit, because not only were we preparing for the statewide elections and the assembly elections in June, for the primary in June, but we had to come up with different maps on the fly for the Senate and congressional districts. And counties that were kept whole, they were okay, but there weren't that many counties that were kept whole, especially when we look at the New York Senate maps. And it just became quite a problem. And then, of course, to turn around and do an August primary after June was all problematic. And that's all because of the New York State redistricting process that, as much has been written about how it failed and why it failed. But because of that failure, it created a lot of chaos and a lot of anxiety at boards of elections, which led to a lot of uncertainty for voters. And I still believe that redistricting is why we saw so many close races this year, because people were running in places that they've never run in before with very short notice. And we saw a lot of races that were very close because of that. So that was the New York State redistricting, and that was really what shaped 2022. However, there was still local redistricting that is happening and will happen. The bad, there's the good and the bad here locally with that. The Syracuse Independent Redistricting Commission, which is actually an independent redistricting commission. It's made up of citizens. They went through and totally changed the city of Syracuse in August, and those maps were ratified by the Common Council. And they will be taking in effect in 2023, taking the 5 district councils in Syracuse and changing them. There was a lot of meetings on that over the last year, a couple of very intense Common Council meetings on that. But that was a very good failure, or very good success. And those maps are in place and ready to go, and there is no legal challenge to those. They have been accepted, and candidates are running in those for 2023. The bad is, of course, the Onondaga County Legislature maps. Now, that redistricting technically happened in 2021, at the end of 2021, and into December of 2021. The county legislature and the redistricting commission, the charter commission for the county, which I am a part of, had a very partisan, intense battle on those lines, in late 2021. However, we haven't heard much about it in 2022 because the lines don't go into effect until 2023. There is a lawsuit, again, another thing that I'm a part of, to throw out those lines because they divided communities and are seen as partisan. That lawsuit is going to take quite a bit of time, and it looks like it most likely won't reach a conclusion before this next year. So people will be running on those old maps this next year. Or not the old maps, the new maps drawn by the legislature in 2023, but those could change based on the result of the lawsuit. Finally, and so that is, that is all the redistricting news that kind of shaped this year. Then, of course, the second thing that I think really shaped 2022 was the New York governor's race, which ended up being closer than expected. Although at the end of the day, not all that close. It was still like 7 or 8 points. But it was the closest governor's election since George Pataki beat Cuomo back in 1994. So it was a close election, but it wasn't necessarily the close election that many pundits, especially at the end, thought there was going to be, where Lee Zeldin was taking on Kathy Hochul. But that race did tend to have a down ballot effect, in my opinion. There was not as big of a coattails for the governor's candidate, which I think affected some of the New York congressional races that we had in these new districts, where there weren't as many Democrats coming out, there weren't as many Democrats staying on the line, and that, I think, contributes to some of the losses that we saw in New York on the congressional side. However, it is important to note that there weren't those losses on the Assembly and Senate side, and while Republicans picked up a couple of seats in those races, you still see supermajorities in the New York Assembly and the New York Senate. So statewide, for Democrats, it was a successful year. There was many people that, that won office, that supermajorities in both chambers were kept. The governors, did win. And outside of the congressional maps, which a lot of it can be blamed on redistricting, and some of it can be blamed on a poorer performance at the top of the ticket than is normal, that, it was actually a pretty successful year for Democrats throughout the state. And in Onondaga County, we picked up a sheriff's race that was not something that many people expected. However, as I mentioned before, the congressional races did not fare as well. And that's also here in Onondaga County, the new New York 22, which makes up Onondaga, Oneida, and Madison. We lost, the Democrats lost that congressional seat. It was an open seat, and a person who didn't even live in the district won that seat. So it was a hyper thin win. It was 1 percentage point. I think it ended come down to. That's a very small amount of votes, in a congressional race. I think it was the tightest, that we've ever had here in New York, or in New York 22 anyways. Maybe tighter than even the Maffei-Burkle races back in the day. But we saw, that was a big thing this year, was those tight races for the congressional races, and also Democrats not doing as well in New York as was once hoped that they would do, which, while it didn't actually, we probably lost 4 more seats than we thought we were going to lose. But because of that, House Republicans are going to be taking the majority, although it's not a 1-to-1 ratio there. We could have won all 4 of those seats, and still the House Republicans would have had a majority in the United States Congress, but it would have been a lot closer, and it definitely played a part. So that was another big story. Another story that I feel like, obviously was something that took the nation by storm is the Dobbs decision on abortion. And we saw that play out here in New York. And I think it's one of the reasons why we saw such great performances by New York House, Assembly and Senate candidates, because people understood that, and even the governor's race, people understood that losing a legislative chamber or losing a governor's office would actually make it more possible for the protections that New York women enjoy under New York law, would not have the Roe v. Wade protections nationwide, and losing any of any control whatsoever would not only hurt our hand in making it more likely or somewhat likely that restrictions could be put in place on abortion, since Roe v. Wade wouldn't be in existence, that we wouldn't be able to adapt and strengthen abortion rights in New York. And I think that played a major factor as well, and definitely played a major factor nationwide, as you saw that Democrats actually didn't do bad. There's a 9-seat majority for House Republicans, but many people thought it was going to be a 30 to 40 seat majority for House Republicans. Democrats actually picked up a senator, going to 51 U.S. senators in a year that many people thought that they were going to lose the chamber. They picked up governor's offices. They picked up legislative offices. In fact, there are more people now living under Democratic legislators in the United States since the 80s. So Democrats really did very well. And I think a lot of that is because of the Dobbs decision by the United States Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade and make it and energize Democrats in a midterm that they otherwise wouldn't be energized for. And then finally, the last topic that I feel really weighed in on 2022 was the instrumental changes passed by the New York State Legislature for absentee ballots, and the hand count really came into focus in 2022, especially for the Onondaga County Board of Elections. The ability to process and count absentee ballots before Election Day allowed us to declare winners on most races way before than we've ever done before, because people were able to cast their vote and have it counted and not have it come under extra scrutiny that was unwarranted by outside parties. And also, we saw New York lag weeks behind the general election because we wouldn't be able to count a third of our ballots, or even a quarter of our ballots, or whatever it ended up being, because they came in by absentee and wouldn't be able to be counted until after the election. So the new laws that were passed by the New York State Legislature for absentee ballot counting and canvassing before Election Day, that allowed for boards of elections to finish their work earlier and certify earlier, except for the places where we had a hand count. And that's where the legislature put in a hand count, allowed us to any races that were under 0.5%, those races had to be hand counted to determine the true winner. And of course, the biggest example locally is the Senator Mannion Rebecca Shuroff race in SD 50 that had a hand count, where we had a hand count 95,000 ballots, and ended up having a race that on election night thought it was around a 200 vote lead or 500 vote lead for Rebecca Shuroff, ended up coming down to a 50 vote lead for John Mannion after the absentee counts. But after the hand count, it got even closer and it ended up being a 10 vote lead for John Mannion, and he has won. And I think that fluctuation shows you why it's important to have a hand count for these close elections, because machine elections aren't perfect. We have to certify. It takes time to do that. We have to count all the absentees. So any of these close races, having this ability to go to a hand count after the election, will allow us to determine true winners. And we saw that the Rebecca Sheriff, who came up short by 10 votes, immediately accepted the results at the end of the hand count and the end of the court proceedings, and congratulated Senator Mannion, and has not contested the election. And I think that is why the hand count is there, is to give a surety of results to the voters, to the candidates, and allow us to avoid what we see in Arizona and some of these other places where you have these candidates continuing to fight and continuing to argue over election results. So I think the legislative fixes that our democracy has gone under in New York since 2019 really came to bear in 2022. We had expanded early voting sites, we had the counting the absentees beforehand, we had the hand count, and all of these things played a role in having an election that, and actually 3 different elections: the June primary, the August primary, and November general election. All these things came into play this year, and they all played a role in the story of the 2022 election. And I think a significant role. So that's my quick and dirty look back at 2022. I do plan on doing a commissioner in car next week. I'll be back in the office next week. But I will be doing commissioner in car next week, and we'll be looking ahead to 2023 and the races that we have to look forward to, and the election law changes. I did a weekly wonk on that last week. It's on my website, DustinZarni.com. We talked about some of the bills that were late bills that were signed by Governor Hochul that are going to affect our democracy this next year. So check that out. This weekend, I plan on doing a weekly walk where I do a more formal look back at 2022, and also, how I was able to perform on DustinZarni.com to be able to, it's been a year since I've had this website, and I'll be interested to look back and look at some of the stats and see what content people like, what content didn't people like, but also all of the things that happened in 2022 as well. So check out that weekly walk on Sunday. On Friday, I think it will be that I will be talking to Perry Grossman of the New York Civil Liberties Union. We'll be talking about the upcoming legislative session, and we'll be seeing how things go forward in the new year. And he'll be talking a little bit about the legislation, the Harkenrider and Amador decisions that were really played a lot of role in this last 2022 election. So that's all I have for you today. Please be safe. Have a wonderful New Year's celebration. I hope you had a beautiful Christmas. And remember, don't drink and drive. Go out there. There's plenty of rideshare options, or call a friend, because I want to see you happy and healthy in 2023. We got a lot of work to do, as we always do, and I'm looking forward to it. Bye-bye, everyone.